Great. Can everyone hear me? I only heard from a few folks. I'm not sure if everyone's able to hear me. Okay, I see you, Dr. James. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Mr. Gann, are we waiting for anyone?
Commissioner Chinya, I haven't heard that I haven't heard anything, so I'm assuming she's en route.
Great. So I just, to be respectful of everyone's time, to the folks that are with us, Dr. Brooks will not be with us at this meeting today. So I'd just like to get started. Happy Tuesday to everyone, and welcome to the September 21st Board Policy Committee meeting of the Baltimore City Board of School Commissioners. We have several things on our agenda today. Staff discussion is around Board Policy EBCD, delayed openings and emergency closing of schools. Hopefully those folks are prepared here and ready to get started. And then we have 4 compliance reports, one around Policy ADA, then DBCA, DCB, and then EAB. And so let's get started. I hope that everyone is having an okay day. It's been pretty busy for me, but we're certainly excited to move the work forward for our children and our communities here in Baltimore City. So we are ready. Who's presenting for us?
Hi, Commissioner McFadden. This is Allison Perkins-Cohen, Chief of Staff for City Schools, and I am joined today by Joe Strike and Josh Sivan, our Chief Legal Counsel, are both here as well, who've worked on this policy.
Great.
Okay, so we thought it was time to review our school closing policy and to make sure we're being thoughtful about what we do in closing situations. Given we've all just gone through the last year and a half that we didn't quite expect in terms of how we close schools. And so we need to just think a little bit about making sure our policies aligned with our current context, as well as is responsive to things like early release situations for things like lack of air conditioning. So making sure that the policy is reflective of a range of situations. So today we're going to talk about the procedures for delayed openings and emergencies closures, both again separating out system-wide closures as well as school-specific situations. The policy addresses the personnel that we expect to work when schools are closed, and then as well as the emergency response process we have in place for notifications when we have either delayed openings or closures. We, of course, always want to make sure that we're aligning with our board strategic priorities. So the alignment is associated with priority 5, where we're making sure that we have that all students have equal access to our services and our resources in our facilities. So again, making sure we have a policy in place that can make that possible, as well as priority number 7 is looking at making sure that we're implementing policies that create a welcoming and inclusive environment. So part of that is about when we are trying to keep schools open as much as possible, which is frankly our priority, is making sure our schools are available for students whenever we can, and then making sure we have a thoughtful process for when we have to close them or release them early. So in terms of proposed policy changes, a couple key pieces we want to highlight here is that we did add a definition of emergency situations because that wasn't in here before. So we wanted to make sure we had an expansive enough definition of emergency situations to deal with all the different, the kind of new normal in terms of the different types of situations that we're facing. We also want to make sure that we give the CEO and designee the ability to close or delay the opening or dismiss early in the event of emergency situations that affect one or more specific schools in the district. And then also, given the last year and a half when we had to switch to a virtual environment, we talked a lot about what does that mean now in the context of school closure. And so the way we kind of thought about this for this policy is making sure that we have the authority to shift the system to a virtual environment, and not necessarily prescribing that we always will, because in some situations it may make sense and be possible, in some situations it may not. So, but adding that new flexibility to allow us to be able to make that shift when it makes sense. So for regulatory changes, we wanted to make sure that we, again, had language about closing system-wide and delayed school openings that deals with emergency situations inside schools. So before we talked about kind of more narrowly about the temperatures in schools, and so this is making sure that that if there are emergency situations that that negatively impact the learning environment in a variety of different ways, that we have a way that's one of the ways that we could close schools. Also, under early dismissal of schools, tried again to make it broader about based on a variety of factors. It could be that we need to release schools early because of weather forecasts. I mean, we recently had an early release due to the hurricane that was really projected to be bad for Baltimore. It turned out not to be, but again, you need to be prepared. There was serious flooding in other parts of the state, including an emergency school bus evacuation by boat in another part of the state. So you have to make sure that you're ready for those kinds of situations, and that our policy addresses the different ways that you might need to close. It could also be guidance from other public agencies. Again, in that particular case I just talked about, we did get guidance from the Office of Emergency Management suggesting that we close because it was really supposed to be bad at the time of our regular dismissal. So trying to get students out early, and making sure that the conditions inside a school that could negatively impact learning environment. So in the last, since school started, we've had a number of warmer days where we had to close early for those schools that don't have air conditioning. So we've made tremendous progress, as the board knows, on that. We started when Dr. Santelises started in her role, we had 76 schools that lacked air conditioning. We're now, that was in 2017. We're now down to 21. But in those buildings, we've tried to be really clear that when it gets too hot, that we will release buildings early. We are on track on that plan to complete it exactly on the timeline that we communicated to the Board of Public Works, and that was approved by the governor and the comptroller and the treasurer as part of that, them releasing the funds that they had held back. And we still have 21 schools that are exactly where they're supposed to be in that plan, and still need air conditioning. And when it's too hot, we need to make sure that we are giving students and staff can go home and not be in those buildings when it's too hot. We also make sure that the regulation addresses the communication procedures to make sure that that's tight, and then we have a clear way that we're notifying folks, as well as expectations around non-essential staff during system-wide school closures. Next, in terms of the regulatory changes, we also, again, we left the way that we set the language up is that that there is authority to switch to virtual or remote operation when if there is need for a school closure. And so we kind of laid out what that could look like and what the notification happens that would need to happen. This is, again, a new part of the regulation, and so we want to make sure that's an option. And again, kept it as an option as opposed to a requirement because it somewhat depends on the circumstances. We need to make sure that students have the technology in order to make that shift, so that they physically have the technology. And now that we're back in an in-person setting, some of that technology that had been with students is back in schools. And so if students aren't carrying it back and forth, which they're not always, preparing to make sure that they have it at home if we're going to be closed and can switch to virtual, like that's a consideration that we have to be prepared for. Making sure the students have internet access is another one, and then making sure that they know how to get on the various platforms that we use, between students changing through transitions in mobility, new students coming to the district, old students leaving, as well as new students coming in at peak grades like pre-K or kindergarten. Those students haven't had to get on virtual potentially. So making sure that we do some prep with schools if we're going to have to switch to a virtual environment, that they are kind of ready for that, and that teachers kind of are prepared with how that shift is gonna happen. So we want to make sure we have the authority to make the shift, and are not, but not always required to make the shift, because sometimes it may not make sense, or we may not be in a position to shift with the amount of notice that we have. And so next steps is today's policy review committee is the step on September 21st, and then we've started some of the stakeholder feedback and engagement in September, and that continues in October, and then October 26th is when we'll do the first reader, and we'll continue the stakeholder feedback in November and December, and then the second reader would be December 14th. This slide gives some of the schedule for some of that engagement. So with regard to ASCBC, we do have a meeting scheduled with them on October 12th to go over the policy. We are working with the BTU on a focus group for teachers to get their input on the policy. We are also working closely with the Council of Great City Schools and MSTE and their teams to get input from them about how other jurisdictions are doing that, and make sure that's reflected in what you're seeing. For PCAB, we are scheduled to present there on September 23rd, and then we are also working with Piazza on designating a group of principals that can provide input as a focus group, because again, principals are really critical in thinking about this. Student Commissioner Horowitz, who I just saw come on, we want to make sure we connect with you to get your thoughts about how to best engage with students other than the things that we're planning, because that, it's just a critical voice that you have, is to help us think through how to do that more effectively. And then also we'll be doing a survey. We'll have survey questions included in our Quick Pulse survey that will happen at the end of September, that will get at this question. And then we did present to the Charter and Operator-Led Schools Advisory Board on September 9th. And that was it. I think this is just the appendix about some of the closure days. So that's it, and open for questions and conversation.
Can you go back to the engagement slide, Allison?
Yes.
Or not you, or whoever is controlling it.
Yeah. I think Joe's working on that.
Yeah, give me 1 second. Sorry about that.
Sure. When we see planned, like with teachers and with principals, and then we link their bargaining unit there. I'm curious to know what that means. Like, what does it mean to have a planned focus group? Are they selecting folks? Are we randomly selecting folks to get their feedback? What does that look like? Because what I'm finding as a challenge from what we're hearing from members of the community in various ways is not enough authentic opportunity to engage around our policies as they're being developed. And so I want to make sure that, especially as we move forward, that we're providing relevant space. Where did it go? It was there and it left us. Relevant space, but also authentic space for folks to, number one, be educated on why we're initiating this or revision or whatever it is, but then also to get their feedback on how we can move forward with this. So I'm curious to know what that plan focused means.
So we've reached out to the two bargaining units to get their input. To your point, Commissioner McFadden, we do conversations with focus groups of our own. So we have an advisory group of teachers, and so we often ask them for nominees as well. We always want to make sure we speak with our union partners to get their input, and then also reach out to other teacher groups as well to make sure that we're getting a range of different opinions, because these are difficult issues, and we want to make sure that we're getting, to your point, authentic and representational input from a variety of stakeholders.
Certainly with those teachers and principals, I appreciate that. I would just be interested to hear how that evolves over time, especially with something like this. I appreciate seeing the highlight here, number one, to include our student commissioner and Commissioner Horowitz. I want to, bring you in next for your thoughts now before you have this meeting with staff to do that. But then the poll there, right, that pulse survey, would it be possible to do something similar like that with our parents, principals, and teachers? Like some sort of just, some sort of survey, some sort of poll to kind of gauge a more broad range of folks? Is that an option?
We could certainly talk to Tina and her team about that. I mean, the challenge always is just the survey fatigue issue, which is very real. We're surveying people left and right. And so I just would need to talk to her about how it fits in with other priorities that she has for survey. We really impact our response rates and the breadth of respondents when we kind of over survey. And so I have to ask her about how it would fit into other things she already has planned, and then how it fits as a priority with regards to other things she already has planned.
Got it. I just think having just more options, right, could broaden the reach and scope of who we hear from, and just for me makes it more authentic, right? When we just hear from a plethora of folks, and then provide the option for folks to at least engage that way.
Yeah.
So it's just a thought. Commissioner Horowitz, are you with us? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I'm going to be honest and say I had technical difficulties, so I was late. So I was wondering if Alex could please provide a recap.
Oh, so the whole presentation. Or
so
just
no, wait 1 second. My brother's calling me.
So what we can do.
Okay, sorry. I'm back.
Sure. So Commissioner Horowitz, if you see the screen right here, you're actually on this list for Chief Perkins Cohen to actually meet with you personally. Yeah. So that could be an opportunity for you to hone in even more deeply, if you don't have any initial thoughts just yet.
Yeah. And Commissioner Horowitz, I just think that your voice is really important about this topic. I mean, you're directly impacted by it, and you're a representative of students. And so we will make sure we spend time speaking with you specifically about this policy, and get your input and thoughts, your input personally, as well as your thoughts about how to engage other students more effectively on a topic that directly impacts them.
Definitely. So just to clarify, because I missed part of the meeting, I was trying to jot down some notes so I could remember what you talked about. If I'm remembering, were you discussing virtual learning? I know that you talked about surveys. What exactly will those surveys encompass?
Yeah, this is about in times when we have to close schools, it's kind of what that looks like, and making sure we're updating our school closure policy and early dismissal policy. And because of the last year of the pandemic and switching to virtual, we have added a provision that would allow us to, instead of closing, say for a snow day, that we wouldn't just close, that we would switch to virtual. Now, that we very intentionally, Commissioner Horowitz, put it as authority to make that switch, but not like a requirement that we put that switch in place, because there's a lot of factors into whether we can be ready to make a switch to virtual, and also whether it makes sense to switch to virtual. And I said last time when we presented at the earlier stages of this policy that one consideration is just the benefit of sometimes having a break. I mean, a mental break of a snow day is kind of a quintessential break that people associate with schools, and it's not bad sometimes to let people have a kind of unexpected break. And so do we want to always automatically switch to virtual, or do we want to give ourselves space to, if it's a long snow period, for example, where then you're really starting to miss school, is that when you start switching to more to a virtual option? But the way it's drafted currently would give us authority to switch to virtual when schools close, but not require it.
Okay, that clarifies. Thank you.
Dr. James?
So my only question on this is if it's within the scope of the policy or if it's somewhere else. But coming from the idea that many school closures will happen because of weather or weather related, whether it's heat or cold or HVAC, stuff like that. Are there ever occasions, or would it be worth delineating those occasions if we're going to have school, but we're going to cancel other activities, like we're going to have school, but we're not going on a field trip, or we're having school, but we're, just canceling, intramurals are happening, but extramurals are not, or interscholastics. And I don't know if that's beyond the scope of this, but if I was looking for, will my kid go on a field trip today? I feel like I'd look towards this policy when I searched it.
So that's a good point. I can't think of a lot of times that we've had school open but canceled activities during the day. I mean, maybe we have, but I can't think of that. Doesn't mean we shouldn't have a policy provision for it, but I'm just thinking in the 5 years I've done this, I can't think of a case where we've done that. Then again, if you asked me 2 years ago if we'd ever closed the entire system for 18 months, I would have said no. So you do have to be prepared for every situation, but I can't think we do that very often. What we do sometimes is we close for extracurricular activities, after school activities. If there's bad weather coming later in the day or on the weekends, then we will close all extras after school activities. So we've done that, and I have to think about whether this allows for that or specifies that, and if not, we should make sure we update it to make sure that that's clear too.
Yeah. So, and again, I don't know if it would expand beyond the scope of what we're trying to do here. Just or maybe we just don't have enough field trips and we need to use that as leverage to get more. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts from board colleagues or from any of the staff, along with Chief Perkins-Cohen? Anything else we need to clarify, or anything else that we'd like staff to know as they continue to draft this first reader for the full board? Okay. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you all. Appreciate it. And if you have extra thoughts, if you think thoughts later about pieces of it, please let us know.
Oh, we will. It.
You're not shy. I like that. That's great.
But thank you so much. So next up, we have 4 compliance reports. And I'm going to go through each of them. Good afternoon, Dr. Durant. I'm going to go through each of them. You look lovely, by the way. I just want to say that. It's like you just appeared. It's like Allison, not that you don't look lovely, but one just left, and then we just had another just appear. So
Yeah. I heard it. Yeah.
Good afternoon. So we have 4. We're going to take them individually. If there are any questions or thoughts, then we can facilitate some discussion. But we do have policy ADA, equity up first. And Dr. Durant, what I will say first is thank you for that report. I know that you are facilitating and leading that work, but it is a team of folks, as I'm sure you'll say, as they all are appearing right now, that support the work that you do. One of my initial thoughts as I glanced through the compliance report was in regard to student outcomes. So for me, I saw quite a bit of information that focused on professional learning and professional development for staff. And I know that we have a plan, a timeline, right? But I'm curious to know a little bit more about how that work is aligning to not necessarily our priorities, strategic priorities, or the blueprint. I think that is, we can see that kind of, but I want to know how this work has been translated to improving student outcomes over the 3 years that we've had, or that we've adopted the policy. So if someone could speak to that for me, that was one of my first initial thoughts, and then I'll open it up to my colleagues.
Sure. Thank you, Commissioner McFadden. Good evening, commissioners, or afternoon. Just want to first start by acknowledging the presence of my team, as Commissioner McFadden has noted, who are all on the screen. So our manager, Chidamawe Daka Mwanda. We have 2 specialists now, Ebony Nicholson and Paige Riggins. Sonia Dolan is staff associate for continuous improvement. And Lisa Ann Kim has just returned back to city schools. I think today is day 7, and she is now the Be More Me program manager. And so one of the things that I would say initially, Commissioner McFadden, is one, thanks to the board and the district's commitment, we now have a team that is expanding, which allows us to go deeper into the work, which was always part of our plan, as you mentioned, in our implementation plan. And so part of the student piece, we said we would be in year 3. And just one point of clarification, Commissioner McFadden, this is year 3. We haven't completed 3 years. I think the pandemic added like multiple years.
Yo, it added a year. It added a year or 5. I don't know what it added, but it added some time.
Yeah. So, and I think it's important for me to just say that because we've had so much going on. We've had the pandemic, and so it feels like it's been a lot longer than it has. But realistically, this is year 3 of our 3-year implementation plan. And so it is in this year, we had always intended to launch our school equity action teams. And so we are getting ready to launch them. So to your question about student outcomes, we see the school equity action team is our opportunity to do the work with schools around outcomes, around culture and climate. One of the things that I think we're most proud of this year as we launch the school equity action teams is also the alignment between SEAT, which is the acronym for it, and the SPP, or the school performance plan. And so Ebony Nicholson, who joined us last year, has spent this last year really organizing and getting us ready for the launch of SEAT by working closely with the team around school performance plan. And so now schools, as they are preparing to develop their school performance plans and have them approved by their ILEDs, as part of that plan, they will now have equity focus in every goal area. And that will be what we will use to support them in our intensive support. So we have a set of schools that are priority schools, which will be supported by the 2 specialists we currently have. And then for those schools that we're not able to really support in the intensive way, we're using our equity fellowship, which we also launched last year. So equity fellows are classroom teachers who are the liaisons between our office and the schools, and we meet with them quarterly to do this, all in service to, really dealing with the student outcomes. The reason I'm proud of being able to do that through the school performance plan and through SEAT is that we have kind of this global approach to systemic work as an organization, right, for across the district. So this 2 years that we've spent on level set, on vocabulary, on protocol, and introducing some tools. Now that we're at the school level, it's going to be specific to the school level data, so we can look at what's happening in ELA, what's happening in math, what's happening in culture and climate. And so that's a long way around, hopefully not too long, to answer your question. Like, this is when the rubber is supposed to meet the road this year that we're going into, or this year that we're in.
I appreciate that. And just thinking about, so I understand what you just said. And in thinking about the generations of inequities that have gotten us to the place that we are currently in, I think it is important that we are intentional about the way that we dismantle it. And so that may take, based on the plan, to your point, that takes time for us to develop the capacity within staff, for us to share the same language, for us to have the same ideals before we really start to move even further into the work. So it makes sense. I understand that. But often when I read compliance reports, I don't see the word student as often as I would like to, right? So that's why that was one of my first thoughts. And if we are in the business of teaching and learning and educating children, all roads lead to that, right? Improved student outcomes and better environments for our students to live and thrive in. So I appreciate that. Colleagues, are there any thoughts? Yeah, go ahead.
I could just say something to that point. I want to just honor the point that you made. And I think it's important for us to say in as many ways as we can and as many opportunities that at least in this first phase of the implementation, so the first 3 years, we were very intentional to focus on adults, right? All in service to students. Your point is well made and it's well taken. I just want to be clear, that so that folks understand kind of our orientation around this was that, our young people are who they are. And 2 or 3 years ago when we did the equity video, one of the things that we called forward was this idea that we have enough data to kind of get a sense of what students really want us to know about their experience. It shows up in absenteeism, it shows up in discipline, it shows up in academic achievement, like it shows up in participation in extracurricular activities, like it's showing up. So the question of how we see what's right in front of us, right, and start to talk about what we need to do in our roles as adults to better equip ourselves to be in service to our students. Like, that's the first phase. Like, let's be clear, we part of the problem. Like, we the system. Y'all talk about disrupting the system. Oh, by the way, that's us. So I've often said to people, like, Tracy has to be different. Tracy has to understand how she's complicit, right? She has to be different in her person so that she's different in her role, and that impacts student achievement. I think in the next phase, to your point, and we will make sure to call it forward in a more deliberate manner, Commissioner McFadden, the student piece of it. So we will keep that in mind for the next iteration of the plan.
I appreciate that. Colleagues.
Commissioner McFadden, you hit to my questions and comments. I appreciate the depth of the report because I think it gives us a great snapshot of the accomplishments you've done as well as the trajectory you're on. Really looking forward to seeing when, what results come and when this starts to get in the hands of young people and students, as well as when schools start to really initiate taking on some of the local level work on their own. If there's filters or ways we can support through this conversation in your putting out a message of how you prefer schools work with you, or what parents and community can expect as far as the school level work being sort of supervised and organized and centralized through you, feel free to share with us at this time. If that's something you want to share later, we'll just look forward to hearing how communities can take ownership of this work in their local spaces.
Yeah, so thank you for that, Commissioner James. What I will say is because we are in the last year of the implementation plan, we are now getting ready to write the next iteration. And so as part of that, there will be, there will be engagement with the board. There'll be engagement with our equity advisory committee that we've launched. There'll be engagement with our students, our school equity action teams, and all of the other groups that you heard in the presentation that preceded this one. And so what I would ask and kind of flag, especially for commissioners and for anyone from the public who's observing the conversation, when the ask comes for you to give us feedback about what the next iteration of the plan should be, like, we really want to hear it, and please take us up. I know, Commissioner McFadden, I remember you sitting in rooms, while we were trying to do the first version of the plan. And so I want to just say you all are welcome in that space, and we really are going to need your input as we develop what the next phase of the plan will be.
And hopefully when you're having those sessions, as I'm sure you will, you'll invite us so that we, can make sure it's on our calendar so that commissioners have the option to participate in that way. Because I do think it's meaningful for me. And I'll just be personal as a commissioner, right? Seeing it from the adoption, Dr. James, of the policy, right? And going from the policy to then focus groups and then all over the city, right? So it's nice to see something in its infancy stages, but I'm also hopeful that as a result of this work, we'll grow into a more equitable school system and city. One thing that I had a conversation with and this is another reason why I bring up students, is because I was having a conversation with my executive director today, and we were talking about just challenges that we have in general as we are now transitioning and shifting into a different way of teaching and learning. And one thing that she said to me is that we have to focus on making sure that our students are safe, that our students understand what's happening, and we teach them. And as a result, if that becomes infectious to parents, to community members, and to everyone. So it's just one of the reasons why I continue to just raise students in every conversation, because they will tell us what they need, right? They will tell us what's happening and what's not happening. And then as a result, they'll start their language, their behaviors, all of that will start to transform the way that their parents engage with us, right? And the way the community members engage with us. So I just wanted to highlight that in our discussion. Commissioner Horwitz, are you there? I'd love to hear your thoughts about this particular compliance report or anything that we've been talking about so far.
No, thank you. I definitely agree. Implementing this plan was very important just for the navigation and functioning of our district, and keeping into ties of equity and participation of multiple student body groups, especially Commissioner McFadden's comment on in the compliance reports not having a good representation of student background information and opinion. The surveys that you guys plan to cast out in order to get more information about those opinions, I think is something that's very important. And it looks like I had just one question. You guys mentioned the school performance plan and the school equity plan. So you said that you guys both launched those, but I wasn't sure if you were saying the school performance plan was within the school equity plan or if they were like separate, because could you explain how the performance would tie into equity? Is that going to be like statistically and demographically separated, and like how would it be?
So let me respond to what I think I hear you asking, and if I'm not responding appropriately, please let me know. The School Equity Action Team is what I mentioned that we're launching soon, like in the next couple of days even. I just met with the ILEDs to have the priority groups approved. So the School Equity Action Teams are going to be school-based teams that are going to lead the equity implementation at the individual school. As part of what we will do with the School Equity Action Teams is the launch of the school performance plan. So the school performance plan is something that schools have to submit and have approved by their supervisors in November. And it kind of guides their work around goal areas. So content, so academic areas, ELA, math, culture and climate, those kinds of things. We are going to be supporting the efforts of the teams to bring their SPP or their school performance plan to fruition. And as part of the SPP, there is an equity focus. So there is like this alignment of the SPP and the School Equity Action Team. Our role is one of supporting the schools to do what they have outlined in their school performance plan. And we're going to use SEEK to do that. Does that answer your question, Commissioner Horwitz?
Yes. So basically what I was wondering is, in the school performance plan, are you specifically trying to outreach a school performance plan that will target all the students, or are you also engaging in the research about the different demographics?
So the school performance plan, so the principals along with the content areas develop the goal areas for the school performance plan. As part of the school performance plan, every goal area, we're asking schools to identify an equity focus, to the point that the question that I think I hear you raising is how we're going to like focus. So part of our guiding questions for the application of an equity lens has us looking at impact on marginalized groups or impact on underserved groups. So through the SPP, when schools choose their equity focus, we're going to be identifying who are those groups that are most vulnerable in your school. And if you're going to do, let's just say you're going to do a professional learning to service all students, right? The question of which are the groups of students who need the additional support, who are the groups of students in your building who are most marginalized, who are vulnerable in your school community, what are you going to do differently for them? So that is part of why we're having them focus in on a particular area. Does that help?
Yes, I was just simply wondering how the school performance plan went into the marginalized and demographic research and action plan. So sorry if I didn't form the question properly.
No. I was making sure I was getting it all out according to what I thought I heard you say. So nope.
Any other thoughts, Commissioner Horwitz?
No, that was my only need for clarification. Thank you.
Dr. Durant and team, is there anything that you need us to keep on the forefront of our brains as we're going through this particular year? I know that it is the third year of the implementation plan, but as we start to move forward, I know you just mentioned things about we're going into the next iteration, are there things that you need us to keep on the forefront of our brains? Are there things that we should be expecting to see within the compliance report in a year from now? And how can we support that work as a board with this particular year ahead of us?
I think I got all your questions. Let me see how I do. So
you can sum it all up in one.
Okay.
You can get hit it in quick.
Okay. So one of the things that I would say for commissioners that I think would be helpful, and I've said this to some of you individually, and certainly when we were in training together, one of the things that we're trying to move through the organization, and this actually comes out of Standard D of our policy standards in the policy, which is around building staff capacity for equity-based teaching and leading. A part of that is the set of questions, right? So the guiding questions for the application of an equity lens. I think commissioners, you probably have noticed hearing that language more. As policies come forward, you're going to be hearing more about guiding questions. You'll hear staff as they're presenting, talking about the guiding questions. We talk about it in the R3 plan. We'll be talking about it in the ESSA consolidated plan that's due to the state. And so I think so that we can make sure that we have alignment, your use of those questions, your pushing, as you start to see more presentations, hear more presentations about seeing where those guiding questions are, things like what are the unintended consequences from the decision we make, even as you are litigating as your team. And making sure that this helps us to remain accountable, right, to one another in terms of what you all expect staff to do and the kind of support that we need from our board in terms of the guiding questions. That would be top of mind for me. And as we are rolling out other opportunities this year, so we've done some things where we've done some open sessions around push out, because we have a lot. We want to talk more about what's happening to, Black girls and their push out in school, the criminalization of Black girls, the adultification of Black and brown bodies. So we're talking about those kinds of things. So as we have opportunities to offer those things for you to participate in, and we invite you to be part of that so that you see what we're doing with staff and why, to your point, Commissioner McFadden, it really does take time to really have people develop certain capacities. And I know that you can appreciate that given your background and your experience in equity spaces. So I would say those things would be important for us. And then I can't, underscore enough when we start to roll out the plan, making sure that as much as possible, you all are there with us and helping us to, guide our questions and pushing us around engagement, all of those kinds of things. So that would be my high level summary. And then I would say, the other thing is, as we are planning symposia this year, as we're doing conferences, this year, if your schedules allow, to please, be with us. We are doing the Maryland Cultural Proficiency Conference next month virtually. So we'll make sure to send that to commissioners. We really want to be in the friend raising business. So it's like, not only when we have a compliance report due, but what are the other ways we can engage and keep you all informed about what we are doing and the successes that we are experiencing during the year. I have to say, to be where we are right now, we, in many ways, we are ahead of some things that we have planned, but that is because of the board's commitment and the district's commitment to growing the team. First time I was here, it was just me. And so now we are definitely growing a team, and it speaks to the commitment of our policy. So, on behalf of me and the team, I just want to, thank you all for your continued support of the work that we are trying to lift as an organization.
Thanks. I think all of that is certainly doable. Anything else from commissioners?
Just a lot of gratitude. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. And then just quickly, I just thought about something. We saw something yesterday with Dr. Swinton-Buck at Digital Harbor, who we're extremely proud of, by the way. Our Maryland Teacher of the Year, Principal of the Year, just doing incredible things. And if you all have not seen the clip from the Today Show, I encourage you all to see it because she's doing incredible work. But a chief of staff from another school system commented, social media, of course, and said, great things are happening in our system. even though a lot of people don't always notice them. And we've got to be responsible for telling our own stories. And so when we think about the work that is happening as it relates to equity and recovery and etc., we've got to own the good things that we're doing and figure out ways to share that out so that no one else is able to tell a story different from the truth. So I just want to raise that in this space. If we're doing this great work and if we're going into the next phase of this plan, I know that most schools, every school system has to have some sort of, equity plan. But what are we doing to support the work of our children in Baltimore City? And how can we get ahead of folks attempting to paint a poor narrative of our brilliant children in our beautiful community? So I just want to raise that here as we're thinking about the next phase of our equity work.
Yeah, and Commissioner McFadden, if I could just say, Howard Stevenson has a book called Promoting Racial Literacy in Schools, and he actually has a racial literacy institute called The Lion Story. And one of the quotes that is a part of that is, the lion story will never be known as long as the hunter is the one to tell it. And so to your point, I think that proverb speaks volumes in terms of our ability to tell our own story. Yes, it's a hard time. Yes, there are a lot of things going on. Yes, we get some things wrong. But the work that my colleagues are doing in city schools, I mean, we are out in front and we are the leaders in many of these ways, especially as it relates to our equity work. We get calls on a daily basis from other districts wanting to know how we are doing, what we are doing, and the pace at which we are doing matters, because no matter who's in the board seats or who's in the CEO seat or who's in the seat that I sit in, the work has to be system dependent and not person dependent. And the way that we are doing this, we are being very methodical in our approach so that it becomes like the paint on the wall. And so I thought that, that quote would resonate with you given what you said.
I appreciate that. Appreciate that a lot. Thank you all for the work, and we look forward to a continued partnership, as we move forward. Thank you all.
Thank you all very much. Thank you, team.
4.02 is compliance report for policy DBCA, that is long-range financial planning. Any questions from any of our commissioners? Questions or clarifying thoughts?
I have one, if it's all right, Mr. Chair. With the long-range financial planning, in the expense projections that are offered, I'm wondering how far off is that from a zero-based budgeting approach of saying, here's our expense projections, but here's what our expense projections would be if we were to offer a truly abundant education to young people. Is it possible to see sort of that, like, this is what we're working for, and this is where we really ideally should be in order to make sure everyone has like the most beautiful, amazing experience possible? Within obviously the constraints of what a typical, like let's say most amazing, beautiful, if they went to school, in Bethesda.
Hello, Mr. Desabay and Ms. Wilson. How are you all?
Good. I am well enough. How are you?
We're blessed. Listen, we're able to do this work, right? And everyone
could always be
say
worse.
that. Absolutely.
Right.
So whoever, go ahead.
So yeah. So on the expense, sorry, I don't know if Jess had a response prepared. I defer to her. I can fill in if needed.
So I was just going to say, if I'm understanding the question, you want to know what it would look like if we priced out kind of a like Cadillac version of education for our students, and then the comparison between the expense projection and that amount to try and establish a gap.
Yeah, and I don't actually need to know the numbers. I'm just trying to frame it for the public to see, just between other LEAs, sort of per pupil resources, what it would cost for us to provide a commiserate education.
So I think two things. One is the purpose of those expense projections, which is to show kind of a status quo, because we're not assuming any future decisions have been made in any of the budget processes. So the intent isn't necessarily to show the gap, it's to show if we just kept going as is with all the decisions that have currently been made, what we think the current decisions would cost. I think then the question around the gap, I think there's a couple of things that already exist that give you an idea of the size that isn't something that our finance team has done, but DLS did some work on that, and we can, I don't remember the exact year, but it was around a $280 million gap between what we were funded and what they had calculated as adequacy for the state. So that gives you an idea of the magnitude, and I can't remember the year for that, but we can certainly dig that up and provide that. I think then the third thing is when we're thinking about what you're asking for, we would need much more clarity on what the benchmark is to be able to do that kind of work, because comparing per pupils between districts or states or just different situations doesn't necessarily give a clear picture of like what students are receiving for those dollars, because the student population may look very differently across different areas. There's a varying like local nuance to what's going on with what's like wrapped up in those per pupils. And so I think, we can provide what DLS has already done, and we can certainly provide some of the state comparisons, but from a per pupil standpoint, but that I don't think really gets to the question.
Right, and I understand, Ms. Wilson, that it's an incredibly complex thing to figure out. But as we're getting this influx of dollars, as people are raising their expectations of what to expect from offerings, yet understanding that that it simply costs more to educate students who have greater need. To try and get us to the point, like I'm hearing Kim Trueheart in my head, what would it take to get an abundant experience for every student so that we can have more real numbers to work with when we go to our legislative folks on the platform to talk, to advocate, to understand and explain funding needs across the state as we transition.
I mean, the other piece that I would point to that we've done in that regard, which is not necessarily a price tag, but it does lay out what a world-class education would look like, is our world-class education document. That the whole purpose of this document was to really lay out specifically what should all students have. The blueprint was our plan of what we could do with the funding we had and reasonably could fundraise. This document was meant to really lay out like what should education really look like for students, and it goes through in very specific detail what it should look like for early learning, what it should look like for college and career readiness in each of the areas, and then for special ed students, for English language learners. We have not assigned a price tag to it. We've done some internal thinking about that, but we've not assigned price tags to it. And of course, the prices change kind of as soon as you finish the estimates. But this is the document where we have laid out very clearly to the public about what we think a student's education really should look like.
And that's exactly what I'm asking, is it in this kind of expense projection, if we could say this is ours if we stay the course to where we are right now, and then this is what it would take expense projection if we were to provide this world-class approach. Yeah, and I don't necessarily need the numbers. I'm putting it out there as a thought for advocacy, for informing, for fundraising, for
Bradford.
For Bradford.
It's part of Bradford too.
Correct.
And with that thought, Allison, you bring up the blueprint, that document, right? That what we have, I think it would be important to somehow interject throughout the year. How do we bring that up, right? As we're focused on 3R or the R3, as we're focused on how do we bring up that world-class education conversation at some point throughout the year, so that we all just kind of keep it on our radar, and so it doesn't get put away, because it's very important work that I know took a lot of time to develop, with a lot of data points that were also included. So I think especially, and it makes me think about new commissioners that are coming on, just commissioners, right? Those community members that are coming to join us. How do we perhaps, Christian, include that as a part of the onboarding process in some way, shape, or form, just so that we're all aware of that in relationship to all of the other things that we're focusing on to move forward? Just a thought.
I think that's right. It's like, what's the gold standard? And that we did articulate what we think the gold standard is. And so we should all know, like, have our eyes on the prize of what we really think our students should have. And I think in regards to the 3R work, and as we move to Kerwin, we should also be thinking about we will not have resources to do all the things that are in the plan of what we think students should really have, but are there pieces that we carve out, that we very intentionally identify that these are pieces we're going to really set in motion and make some progress on over the next few years? And I know Chris and I have had conversations about that, and Dr. Santelises and I have had too. Is like, are there ones where we really kind of put a stake in the ground and we're going to try to make progress in these areas?
Great. Dr. James, any additional thoughts?
No, just that I appreciate the clarity and again, the robustness of the compliance report. Thank you.
Commissioner Horwitz, do you have anything for this? Commissioner Horwitz, are you there? Are you with us?
Sorry, I was accidentally muted.
No
No,
worries.
I don't have any current thoughts right now regarding this.
Okay, no worries. We're off to 4.03, Compliance Report DCB, which is for debt management. Are there any questions, clarifying thoughts around this particular compliance report?
Not from me, sir.
Now, listen, I'm a teacher. I don't care what role I move to. I'm going to give the wait time. I'm going to give it, right? And maybe one day I'll also have some, deep critical thinking questions to prompt some additional responses, but not today. It's not in me. I don't have it in me.
But I did alert Commissioner Reed to these two policies and asked him to take a look at, as our financial wizard on the board.
Absolutely. I did the same with Commissioner Roberts, both Roberts and Reed. So hopefully we'll get some, thoughts from them that they can chime in on if they have any thoughts.
Absolutely. But again, another compliance report. I'm really honored that the compliance reports are really starting to be, really meaningful. Hopefully they're meaningful in the process of producing them as well as in the reviewing them, rather than just being busy work or additional tasks. So thank you to staff who worked on it and board staff who have helped coordinate that.
Absolutely. And then finally, we have compliance report EAB for policy EAB, and that's the disclosure of financial impropriety and improper conduct and whistleblowers in parentheses. My initial thought in glancing at this compliance report is patterns over time, right? So we see this particular year or from the left, how are we comparing the results of what we see this year to previous years, and how does that help us plan for years to come?
So, good afternoon, Jerome Jones, Director of Labor Relations. And so with this particular, that's a great question. And I think it gets at some things we definitely need to look at. We have not done that over time. Over time, we have really, fortunately, not had a lot of cases where we have identified folks who have engaged in financial impropriety. But as we know, when they come up, they can be big. And so we will go back and we can pull the data because the policy came in February of 2018. So it is not a long period of time, but in future reports, we can build in that we then assess what these look like over time and go back and see if there are some themes, whether it be in numbers, whether it be in particular areas that we are getting consistency or we're getting repeat similar types of impropriety, and specifically making sure that we are identifying if there are incidences where people are identified as whistleblowers and there is inappropriate interaction with folks, because you always have to ensure that when people come forward, there can absolutely be no repercussions for reporting what they believe inappropriate actions on behalf of staff, because ultimately that's how you typically find out when a situation arises that someone is brave enough to step forward. And that one way to ensure that people are comfortable doing that is that it is widely known that if you step forward, the district will support you and ensure that there are no negative employment actions taken against you. So we will take that to heart, Commissioner McFadden, and make sure that moving forward, we project both in terms of numbers and also if there are patterns of behavior, and ensure that we are always protecting people who step forward with this policy.
Thank you. That's important for us to know as a board. So I appreciate your attention to it, and just looking forward. I just hope that we'll see that in the compliance report, in that update. But I appreciate you chiming in. Dr. James or Commissioner Horwitz, did you have any thoughts?
No, I didn't have any thoughts. I wasn't, to be completely honest, I had never heard of a whistleblower before. I didn't know what that meant. If I am understanding, it seems like it is someone that allegedly stands up for an illicit affair that they participated in. Is that correct? And also, I think that in answering Commissioner McFadden's comment, you were saying that if someone does wound up in a situation, a legal situation, that the board will initially first stand with them. I had a question of, when it comes to equitable situations in legal cases, when do we decide to stand against the people?
So let me take a stab and see if I can answer or clarify some things here. Whistleblowers are generally when employees may know of, and it could be employees, it could be parents, it could be students, know of a situation where they believe there's inappropriate actions taken by a board employee, and they can report it. They can report it anonymously, and then within the Office of Legal Counsel, there's a staff investigations team that will then do a thorough investigation of those allegations. And in doing that, as far as whistleblowers, the folks who come forward and raise their hand and say, I have information, I believe that there are some things going on which are inappropriate. And even if those that turns out to be not the case, you want to make sure that people do not suffer any kind of inappropriate employment action or retribution for reporting that. Because in our approach, that doing something because, or taking an action because somebody has reported something that they think is inappropriate is extremely serious, and you cannot tolerate that as a board. So what we do, I said, the process is that the person would report it. There would be a thorough investigation of the allegations, and within that investigation, there are two things that can generally happen. The investigation can say, yes, someone did engage in inappropriate action and they're substantiated for those allegations, or they believe, no, there's not enough evidence here to conclude that there was inappropriate action and it is unsubstantiated. And so if it's substantiated, there's a whole process that my office, the Human Capital Office, and specifically in labor relations, we bring people in, we say this is the information, ask if they have additional information, and then based on that, we then recommend if there should be an employment action against that employee. So that's kind of a look at the process. And what we are specifically talked about earlier is the person reporting. That would be the whistleblower, and there's a legal obligation to ensure that there's no adverse or employment action taken against people who step forward and raise their hand and say that there is something wrong here.
Okay, that makes sense. Just you can ignore what I said. I simply misunderstood what you were referring to. Thank you for the clarification.
Anything? Thank you, Mr. Jones. It's always great seeing you.
And thank you. I feel like thank you, Commissioner Horowitz, for asking your question. I mean, that's the purpose of having student commissioners is like we have to make this is understandable to everybody, and that's a term that many people don't know. And so I appreciate you just being forthright and just indicating that it's a term that you weren't familiar with, which there's really no reason why you would be at this point in your life. I'm sure I didn't know what a whistleblower was when I was your age either. So I appreciate you just being honest with that, and so that we can make sure we're explaining to the general public about that, because it is something that's really an important practice in organizations, but it's one that people who haven't worked in a large organization don't know about. So I appreciate your forthrightness and honesty, and just saying that you needed support on that, because that makes sense.
And as a result, perhaps there is something that could be made more clear in the compliance report or in presentations, so that we can make sure that everyone understands, what's happening. So thank you. Yes, Commissioner Horowitz, for that, because it does help to uncover where potentially are some gaps for folks understanding what we're actually discussing and what is actually impacting them or staff members or folks around them. So thank you. The next meeting of the policy committee of the board will be on October 19th at 3:30 to 5:30 p.m. Where we'll be focusing on policy JBA, non-discrimination as far as students is concerned, policy ACA, non-discrimination, policy JICK, bullying, harassment, or intimidation of students. So this is going to be a meeting. I know that a lot of students have been reaching out to me personally. I know to other commissioners and to the board office, certainly to you, Commissioner Horowitz, I'm sure. So Commissioner Horowitz, if there are students that you'd like to invite to this particular policy committee meeting, please make sure that you do that. And if you need any support in getting that done, please work with Mr. Gant, Christian Gant, to make sure that we can support you in doing that. We want to certainly make sure that this is an opportunity for us not only to look at the policy, how it's working. Maybe there are some gaps, maybe there are successes. It's just that time for us to look at it. But also, this is an opportunity, just like in every meeting, we have opportunity for public comment. So it's an opportunity for us to hear from community members, all stakeholders, as it relates to the policy. How can we do things differently? How can we do things better? So Commissioner Horowitz, I just want to make sure that that is on the forefront of your mind for our next meeting. Dr. James?
So to that, I just wanted to toss in just something that we might want to guide as we move forward, and that's working with, I believe it was Ms. Tan, the new addition to the equity team, who's shepherding the Be More Me curriculum, to work directly with the board policy committee to annually figure out which policies are really relevant to students and help get that out through the social studies curriculum for social studies teachers to be able to support engagement, as well as to get students involved as another lever to hear voices. So thank you.
Anything additionally, Christian, Mr. Gant, or is there anything else? Or Tanisha, Ms. Moore, is there anything else that we need? Any other thoughts?
Hi, Commissioner McFadden. I don't think so. I think we're all good. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Well, thank you, everyone. Have a great evening, afternoon. It's 4:39. And we will see you all on next Tuesday. I believe that is the next meeting of the full board. We have a public meeting on Tuesday at 5 o'clock. Have a great evening, everyone.